swiftly. Next up, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nikoleta Jones from the Department of Land Economy at the University of Cambridge Conservation Research Institute. Nikoleta's work explores the social impacts of environmental policy and how to understand public acceptability. So sort of feeding from what Rachel was saying about getting people involved. Her talk today is on land use management within protected areas, the challenge of meeting social sustainability targets. So on to you, Nikoleta.
Hi there. Right, I'll try to share my screen. So thank you very much for the invitation today. Okay, so yeah, I'm Nikoleta Jones. I'm a principal research associate at the University of Cambridge. I am an environmental social scientist, and my work is mainly about how people react when new environmental policies are introduced. I have done work across different types of policies, but in the last few years, my main focus are protected areas. So it's a very specific let's say, part of what we heard in the previous presentation. So I wasn't aware, the kind of audience we will have today, so I decided to start with a very broad definition about what is a protected area. I think most people in this workshop will have visited one, especially those of us who live in the UK. Perhaps we have all these amazing national parks around us. There are very different designations of protected areas, but a broad definition is that there are specific geographical areas where basically we try to protect nature, but at the same time, we try to promote socioeconomic priorities. So to make sure that communities that live within these protected areas or near their boundaries, remain, their social sustainability remains in a good level. Europe is a very good example for designation of protected areas. We have over 100,000 sites. It is in proportion the largest number of protected areas across the world for a specific region. In the UK, we have a lot of designations. From the European Union, we have the Natura 2000 framework. From the UK, we have, for example, the sites of special scientific interest, our nature reserves, our national parks. But we also have international designations like the Ramsar Convention, the wetlands. When we look at a map of the protected areas in the UK, we can see that there's a lot of blue. So these are the marine protected areas. So not very relevant to today's discussion about land management. But there are quite a lot, and they have grown. The number has grown significantly in the past few years. And then all the big chunks of green you see are a lot of our national parks. So up here you can see the Cairngorms, the Peak District here in the middle, Snowdonia here. So these are quite large areas that are currently protected. But we have over 8,000 designations, and this is like a mosaic of designations. So a national park can include Natura 2000 parts of it. So there's a significant overlap. So overall, we're doing okay, but obviously there's room for improvement. So what is the tricky part about protected areas? Because as an idea, they sound quite nice. We protect nature, people can come and visit. There are a lot of conflicting interests within them, and they are very popular with visitors. So a lot of us might live next to a protected area, a nature reserve, for example, and go there every day, or go for a short break to one of the national parks. So they're very popular visitors' destination. And inside them, there are a lot of restrictions, obviously. We have a lot of activities going on. So there are houses, there are people living there. We have the tourists. We have a lot of recreation activities. We have farming, logging activities, which are obviously restricted because of the regulations of the protected area. So all of these activities have a limit, let's say, because the area is protected, or maybe they're not even allowed at all in specific parts of the protected area. And there's another growing, let's say, call for restoration, for making more space for nature. So to bring back spaces that do not exist anymore, that have left, have left us, let's say, for several decades. So there are calls to bring back nature across the UK and in Europe. So although protected areas are supposed to promote also social sustainability, I think today I'm going to present the reality which I think currently we live in, that this is not a simple yes they do or a no they don't. And in order to understand if how protected areas are linked with social sustainability, it is important to understand which users, which are the main groups that are influenced by their designation. And there are two main groups. The one are the visitors. These are people who are just coming in the protected area to enjoy nature and do recreational activities. And then we have the local communities that live within the protected area. And this is one big group that has a lot of small groups like farmers or people who are into logging or people who are employed in the hospitality sector. How these two groups experience the protected area and how they use it determines to a significant extent the level of social sustainability. So my work is mainly about what impacts the protected areas have on local communities. But these impacts also refer to the visitors. So we have, going through the literature, especially in the global north, we see that we have 8 main categories of impacts which are linked with social sustainability. So, for example, a protected area influences the level of income. Someone who is employed in the hospitality sector might experience a positive impact because of the visitors that come in the area. Someone who is a farmer might experience a negative impact because their income has gone down because of the restrictions. So I'm not going to go through all 8 of these impacts. I'm going to focus only on 3 of them, which I think are more relevant to today's discussion. The first one is obviously this very broad term, the well-being. So in general, it is widely accepted that protected areas improve our well-being, they can improve our quality of life. It does make a huge difference, and this has become obvious in the past 6 months, to be able to go out of your door and walk to a nature reserve, to walk somewhere where you can connect with nature. Also about the cultural well-being, which refers also to a more community feeling, that the community is connected to a specific protected area. And obviously, our physical health, our mental health, and our ability to engage with recreational activities. In terms of culture specifically, what often happens with protected areas is they're designated in order also to protect a specific culture. And often we see a very strong attachment from the local communities with a specific area. So people often live for many years within a protected area. So there is an element of, it is not just about protecting biodiversity, but it's also about protecting our heritage, cultural values, spiritual values, and also to promote more traditional professions, a more traditional way of living. I should note, however, that there are cases where protected areas have been designated and people have felt that part of their culture has been taken. So to give an example, we have the Sami communities in Norway, where basically they are reindeer herding communities. And when specific park was designated, they were restricted on where they were able to, for their reindeer herding. So for them, the protected area was a negative thing. They felt that they took part of their culture. And the final thing, it's about how these impacts are distributed. So as I mentioned, they are experienced in a different way by different people and different groups. Often people feel that the protected area gives them more power because they are involved in decision making, but sometimes they feel that it takes some power from them. So it really depends on the level of participation. And depending on which group you are involved, let's say, or where your income comes from, you might feel more the costs coming from the designation of protected area, or you might feel more the benefits. So when we look what has happened, let's say, in the last 20 years in the UK and Europe in terms of the positive things that protected areas have brought with them for the local communities, especially, we see that well-being is the big win here. Also income, which is mainly connected with sustainable tourism, and also the protection of culture. But let's look on the other side of the coin. What are the negative impacts? So we see the biggest losers here, it's equality. So it's not a very high percentage of studies that show us this, they report a negative impact, but it is the most important. So about 20% of studies have shown that in the UK and in Europe, the impacts, the costs and the benefits are not distributed equally across communities. And then it's the issue of human rights. A lot of people feel that protected areas do take some of their rights. And the other thing are the social relations. So often protected areas bring some conflicts between visitors and local communities, or even between locals who are engaged in different activities. So for example, between farmers and people who work in the hospitality sector. So it's a very difficult situation. And if we look at the broad picture, when a protected area is planned and is actually designated, it's very difficult to actually get green colors across all sectors. There will definitely be some parts which, there are costs. However, it is important that, especially the last category here, the social equity, that this kind of costs and benefits, there is some kind of equal distribution, and it's not only specific people who experience all the negative impacts. So it's interesting to see how there are different interests on how we can use the land of a protected area, whether it's going to be recreation, or we are going to build more houses in certain parts, or for example, we're going to have a more sustainable tourism. And COVID-19, it was like a social experiment so far, a very unfortunate situation. But basically what happened is that the moment the restrictions were imposed across Europe, we were one of the first teams that actually went out and gathered data, what has happened across the different national parks in Europe. So when the restrictions happened, the strict lockdown, people stayed at home. Okay, so the parks were, I wouldn't say empty, but they lost a significant amount of their visitors. Once the restrictions were lifted, it is not an exaggeration to say that protected areas were flooded by visitors. So people really needed to go out. So if we look at the first part of this period, so I'm just giving here an example of the Peak District National Park, which had a big change in this period in terms of visitors numbers. So when we ask people, how was it not having visitors? Because this is like I said, an experiment. It's like saying, okay, how will the national park look if we didn't have the pressure of tourism in it, and people basically lived in this landscape just for nature? We see that in general, not having visitors was perceived as a relatively positive thing. Obviously, when we look in more detail, we see that people who are engaged in the hospitality sector were the big lose, they lost a lot of their income. So, okay, the picture overall was positive, but there are parts of the society which have been very negatively impacted by this. And also we should note that we knew, or we hoped back in April, that this situation will soon end. So obviously people gave these answers that, it was nice not having to have 100 people in the peak of the Snowdonia National Park, for example. But they knew that at some point we will go back to normal, or that was the expectation. Once the restrictions were eased, we had a lot of visitors coming in national parks and other protected areas across Europe. This has caused a lot of issues. So one thing is overcrowding. So we had a lot of incidents of overcrowding, and you might have seen, people queuing to go up to the peak of Snowdon, or, people in the Peak District trying to get a parking space and parking illegally. Overcrowding is not a new problem for protected areas, and it was interesting to see how in the previous presentation the different type of land management and protected areas is one of them. And that's a key point, that we have a lot of protected areas that are overwhelmed by visitors, not just after lockdown, but in general. The other very interesting thing is that we had a new profile of visitors coming in the area, which is a great thing, because obviously new people are coming in, and the more people are connected with nature, environmental education is like an indirect and informal environmental education. However, it seems like we have a significant increase of responsible behavior. People often are not aware of main regulations, apart from the obvious things that you're not allowed to barbecue, you're not allowed to park in places where it's not designated parking area, you're not allowed to litter, which are very important issues. There are other small things that people might probably not realize if they're not familiar with how protected areas work. So, for example, that we have to close the gates once we have crossed the gate, or that we don't wander out of the paths because that's where the biodiversity is being protected. So after lockdown, we saw a lot of conflicts, especially with locals not wanting visitors to come in, or even between locals that were engaged with the hospitality sector and those who were not. So COVID, let's say, was, it emphasized the problems that we already knew existed in the protected areas. But people do need nature, and this pandemic has shown that, it was very important for people's well-being, being able to go out and experience, and connect again with nature in order to, to overcome anxieties and the worries that this pandemic has caused. So as a final note, I think it's clear that social sustainability is a very tricky target to reach when you designate a protected area, because obviously you do restrict certain activities for people. So the recommendations that we make, and that is in collaboration with other parks across Europe, is that the number of visitors that come in and the type of tourism that is developed needs to be managed in a more sustainable way. So it is important that people are, let's say, are more spread within a protected area, so that they enjoy the visit, but also that we protect the well-being of locals. The other thing is that we cannot ignore the conflicts that have emerged between the different groups when we designate new protected areas. And also that the distribution of benefits and cost needs to be better balanced, which I think it's one of the biggest problems today in conservation. And as a final note, that yes, we do think that there is a need to increase the number of protected areas. There is more and more need from people to be able to enjoy nature. And protected areas is a successful way to do that, as long as we take into consideration the socioeconomic priorities also of the different groups that use these protected areas. So that was from me. So here are the details of our project. I think all our details are also on the website.
Thank you so much for that, Nikoleta. I actually, it was really interesting to hear basically balances between, I suppose, environmental sustainability and social sustainability, which you hardly end up hearing. It's mostly pitched against economic. I was actually really interested to hear a little bit more about how you said sometimes in particular countries, I know you were looking at a range of different European countries for this, how protected areas could be seen as a negative, and with people having feeling a sense of loss. And at the end, you mentioned that that might be because of more socioeconomic reasons, but there was also this sense of disempowerment from participation level. And I'm just kind of wondering whether I can imagine that there are some, nature reserves or let's say natural places that aren't designated and aren't protected. That's one of the things that comes out with the planning for the future paper, where the historic environment sector is concerned about this overemphasis of protected area where we might not have identified unprotected areas. And I'm just wondering how your work kind of weighs against places that might not necessarily be protected yet, and how to kind of go about ensuring that social sustainability while potentially seeking the environmental sustainability. I'm not sure. It's a difficult question, but
it is, yeah. No, I mean, the thing is that protected areas are the most popular tool for biodiversity conservation, and I think we are kind of, it's the immediate thing we reach out as a policy tool, which is not necessarily the best. So restoration might be better, for example, just leave nature. But I think considering today's society and today's economy, it is the best tool we've got, let's say. It's not ideal, right, but it's the best. So I think that it's better if an area is not designated, sometimes it's better to have some kind of regulations so that people are aware what they're allowed and are not allowed. It doesn't have to be as restrictive as, like very strict nature reserves. It can be something, a lighter version of a protected area. And national parks are a little bit like that because they do have people in them. So I think I will be more in favor, let's say, of designating, but including people within them. Not, this idea of having boundaries around them and not letting people coming in. I think it's a thing of the past.
Yeah, fantastic. So I don't see any questions, but if any of you have more, Nikoleta, will you be sticking around for an hour or so?
Until
or half an hour?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, we have one. Anna, oh, they're coming in. So we are supposed to go to a break, but I'm just gonna ask these quickly and we'll be a bit late, sorry. Guys, so Anna Tonk asks, how do we reconnect people to nature and stewardship when they only use the landscapes as leisure destination or object for use? Is it possible we make it a reciprocal relationship instead of the common consumption of natural areas?
Yeah, thank you, Anna. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that you've mentioned there, because yeah, indeed, and that's what we have experienced with COVID, that people just come in, enjoy nature and go out. And to be honest, I think it is a part of an issue with people coming from more urban areas, so I think the only way is environmental education. One of the things we have discussed with parks is how, this is a new profile of people coming in. So the environmental education programs we have are not tailor-made for this kind of audience. So we need to have more targeted, let's say, information campaigns. It's pretty straightforward what you can and can't do in a protected area. So it's not difficult not knowing that you're not allowed to have barbecues, let's say, within protected area. So I think I don't think it's very difficult. It's just targeting the right people.
There's another one, but I think I'm going to go straight to break because we're running 5 minutes behind. So everyone, thank you so much, Nikoleta, for coming. I'm so happy to have stumbled across your work, and I thought that was incredibly interesting. So we'll go on to a break now for 5 minutes and just sort of bite off a bit of the panel discussion. So everyone, please do come back at 11:05. Thank you very much.